Hello, Chain Gang. Welcome back to the Four Chains and Top 5 Friday again. I'm going to put up the list right off the bat here. This is a list of ones you'll recognize. We've done some of these before. These are the ones that we plan on doing in the future. Our Patreons kind of got together and had a side conversation about that. If you see anything on this list that you want me to do sooner rather than later, just go ahead and put it in the comments. Or more importantly, if you have a list that you want us to do that's not on here, put it in the comments. Either way, if we use your list, we will give you a shout out. And that brings me to today's list, which is the 5 best National Hockey League players of all time. You know, I'm really nervous about this list because it might be our least important. I mean, last week was most influential world leaders who ever lived. But today's list is, the shout out goes to John Barber, and that's why I'm nervous. John Barber is my friend now, but he used to be my boss for a long time. And, you know, you still never kind of lose that dichotomy. The other thing is I have an enormous amount of respect for John. And he used to be my boss as vice president of Team Washington, and now he owns like 26 stores, so he's a bigwig now, but he's a huge hockey fan, and I know that there are parts of this list he is not going to like. So John, just please, busted my butt for you for a long time. Give me the time and listen to this list, and if you watch the whole list and you still disagree, I'll be okay with that. First, I want to talk about the criteria. I don't want anybody to think I've really blown it and they don't really understand the criteria. One of the things I really don't like about top 5, top 10, top 100 lists is rarely do they spell out the criteria. What is making them make these decisions? The criteria for this is essentially the same as all my sports lists. I am saying, okay, I'm a general manager and I am picking these players. This is the order in which I would pick them if I knew I could have their entire career. And obviously now I know what their entire career is, or most of it if we're picking an active player. So it's a career value list more than a peak value list. So like, for instance, my favorite player right now is Connor McDavid. If I redo this list in 5 years and he has a season like he had this season, you know, 4 of those 5 or something, he's going to be on the list. But right now his career is just a little bit short. So let's dive right into it. Number 5. Number 5, this is the end result of a debate I've been having with myself for about 20 years. It turned into a goalie debate. And I've been going back and forth on who I thought is the greatest goalie of all time for a long time. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought it was Ken Dryden. And I've been going back and forth ever since as other prominent goalies have happened. And there was so much research into this and so many things swaying me in both directions. Honestly, I almost copped out and was like, I'm just going to put Maurice Rocket Richard or Jaromir Jagr or somebody in the number 5 list. But I made a commitment not to cop out. I'm never going to do ties. I'm never going to cop out. So I'm going to give you the results of my debate between Patrick Roy and Dominik Hasek. I guess I should say, first of all, I always look at other people's lists. You know, there's one, I think it's on the NHL network, that has Martin Brodeur as the greatest hockey player of all time. I don't want to say he wasn't a great goalie. He's an amazing goalie. He's got a lot of records. Certainly deserved to be talked about among the great goalies, but there's just no way he's the greatest goalie of all time. You know, the main stat people look at with goalies, understandably, like earned run average for pitchers, is goals against average. And Martin Brodeur's look awesome. But when you start to dive into it a little bit more, I mean, he played almost his entire career, particularly with the Devils, who were great defensive teams. And so although his goals against average looks great, he is never, and big-time hockey fans would be shocked at this, he never led the league in save percentage, which for you casual fans is, you know, if there was a shot on goal, in other words, if there was no goalie there, it definitely would have gone in. The percentage of those shots you've saved, and not a single season was he the best in the league. So that I would say that for fans of other sports, it's saying Martin Brodeur is the best goalie is sort of like saying like Whitey Ford is the best pitcher. You know, he played for the Yankees when they were winning the World Series every year, and his stats look great, but the more you delve into it, he's still a great pitcher, just can't be considered among the greats of all time. So I guess I'll talk about Patrick Roy. Other than Ken Dryden, he's my favorite goalie of all time, and it's all like an attitude. I just feel really strongly that he, that his attitude is great in the clubhouse. There's that great clip of some goalie had talked crap about him, and he was saying that he couldn't hear him because his 2 Stanley Cup rings were plugging up his ears. He would wound up getting 4 Stanley Cup rings. He won 2 with 2 different teams. And the biggest statistic that argues that he be number 1 is that he won 3 Conn Smythe trophies. That is number 1 for any player at any position all time. There is almost nobody, no matter how great they are, that has any statistic that puts them above Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky only won 2 Conn Smythes. And so, to me, that really talks about why Patrick Roy is so great. I would say, like, his prominence in the history of hockey is his perfecting of the butterfly style. Because that, for current hockey fans, it might not sound like a big deal because everybody's doing it, but he was the first one that was just his go-to, and he was obviously astonishingly effective with it. And so he's probably the most influential goalie, I would say, of all time. And it's just, the argument for him is when you watch him play, particularly in the Stanley Cup Finals. I was rooting for the LA Kings because I was living in LA when they made the finals towards the end of Gretzky's career. And Gretzky just couldn't dominate this guy, and I'd never seen that before. It's just hard to believe when you watch him that there's anybody in the history of the game that you would rather have between the pipes than Patrick Roy. But for me, there is. And that is the Dominator, Dominik Hasek. His argument is kind of the opposite of Brodeur. He played most of his career for poor defensive teams, the Buffalo Sabres, for those of you who aren't particularly familiar with him. Those were some really bad teams. If you look just at the back of the hockey card and his goals against average, it looks like, hey, him and Brodeur is a pretty close comparison, but the more you look into Dominik Hasek's number, the more you realize not only does Brodeur not compare to him, nobody compares to him in the history of the league. Why is he called the Dominator? Well, his first 3 years don't look that great. He was like a part-time goalie. They were platooning him and another goalie. And then in his 4th season, they decided to make him the main guy, and he got in a rhythm that put him on a 6-year run that certainly is the best 6-year run any goalie ever had, including Ken Dryden's peak. But you could argue it's the best 6-year run that any player at any position has ever had. Let me explain to you why. Over a course of 6 years, he stopped 93% of shots on goal. Martin Brodeur and Patrick Roy, the 2 people who are in the argument for best goalie over him, never had a single season where they averaged 93%. And then if you look at Dominik Hasek's playoff stats, he was even better in the playoffs when it was on the line. And that's rare, as I've talked about in other sports, because you're only playing playoff teams. So normally superstars, their statistics go down, not Dominik Hasek. And so that made me think, he's got a similar locker room thing that Patrick Roy is going on. One of the things that I like to look at is award voting when analyzing any sport. And the reason is because if you've been around long enough, you realize that there are players who have been marketed very well. And so their reputation has increased since they've retired over how they were thought. I think if you asked your casual basketball fan how many MVP awards Kobe Bryant has won, they'd probably say 5, and the answer is 1. A lot of sabermetricians believe that he shouldn't have won that one. It should have gone to Dirk Nowitzki that year. But there's players like Yogi Berra, who you would probably say, oh, that goofy guy. I would say he's never won an MVP, and he was the best baseball player in the 50s. So marketing can go a big way towards either diminishing or enhancing anybody in sports reputation. You look at Joe Namath, you would think he was the greatest quarterback of all time. Maybe not so much. I could give a lot of examples. Let's look at Dominik Hasek, how he was viewed at the time. Goalies do not get a lot of MVP love. Why? Well, the same reason why baseball players don't get a lot of MVP love if they're pitchers, because they have the Cy Young. That's like the MVP for pitchers. For goalies, the MVP is the Vezina Trophy. And Dominik Hasek, correct me if I'm wrong, he is one that, I think I have all these numbers right, but I don't have them right in front of me. Angie's producing off stage, so she can tell me if I mess this up. Dominik Hasek won 6 Vezina trophies. Martin Brodeur won 4, and Patrick Roy won 3. So it's all really impressive things. But Brodeur and Roy never won a Hart Trophy, which is the trophy for winning the MVP. Dominik Hasek won it twice. But not only did he win it twice, I wrote this down, he came in, and he did it for, keep in mind, he's playing goalie for bad defensive teams. So it's just astonishing that he would win this. He also came in second once and third 2 times. So that's 5 times where he was considered either the first, second, or third best player at any position in the entire league. That is astonishing. The intangibles for Roy don't go away. I would make the article that Hasek is at least close to that. If there's a definite tiebreaker for me, it's the 1998 Olympics. Patrick was the goalie for Canada, and Canada was favored to win the gold medal. The secondary kind of co-favorite was Russia. The favorite for the bronze was Finland, because they had Teemu Selanne. If you're a casual fan, you don't remember who he is, but there was a period of time when he was an offensive force. People were talking about him in Gretzky-like adjectives. But there's one problem. The thing about hockey is, I guess kind of like all sports, you can't win unless you score. So if you never score, no matter what else happens, you're not going to win. And Dominik Hasek just decided that he was going to win a gold medal. How remarkable is that? Well, he played for the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, and they weren't favored to win a medal at all. They'd never won a gold medal. And Hasek just became unbeatable. This period of time, the 1998 Olympics, you could make the argument it's one of the best performance runs of any player in the history of sport. Let me explain. Czechoslovakia was not a great offensive team. They had one great offensive player. They beat the USA, who was supposed to be better than Czech Republic. They beat them 4-1. That was their best goal scoring. USA was able to score on him. But then they faced Canada and Patrick Roy, and they knew they were going to score less goals, and they did. They only managed 1 goal against him, but Canada could not score on Hasek, and they won 1-0. They move on to Russia in the finals. Once again, same deal. They could only get 1 goal, but Russia could not score on Hasek, and they won the gold medal. The more you dive into this, the more remarkable it is. You look at his goals against average, 0.97. Less than a goal a game he gave up. And it's not like it's like a situation where his team was just shut down defensively. He faced a lot of shots, but he saved 96.3% of his shots. Remember, I was talking about Roy and Brodeur never had a season where they saved 93%. During this Olympics, Hasek saved 96.3%. And so to me, that is the performance that puts him over the edge and makes him the 5th best hockey player of all time. Let's move on to number 4, and that is Bobby Orr. 4 is Bobby Orr. I am a huge Bobby Orr fan, which might surprise you right off the bat because, Bobby Orr is either 4th, 3rd, or 2nd in every list. But it's more a criteria thing. The reason why he's 4 for me, because I'm talking about career value, and his career is shorter than all the other people on this list. My mother and father's family are both from the Boston area, and Bobby Orr, when I was a kid, was the biggest Boston star, more than Cal Yastrzemski or Carlton Fisk or whatever. He, both sides of my family still reside in Boston. I had an autographed Bobby Orr jersey on my wall. I just absolutely loved him. I would say that if this was a peak value list, the 2 players that are going to follow Bobby Orr, he would be ahead of them in terms of peak value. That's how great he was. Let me talk about his uniqueness. He was the first great defenseman who was also a great offensive force. Now, some people like Paul Coffey or Ray Bourque, like following him, have followed in the exact same footsteps. But before Bobby Orr, it was absolutely unheard of. And he wasn't just good at both. He was astonishingly good at both. He was the best defenseman in the league. To give you an idea, like the defensemen also have their defenseman MVP, and that's called the Norris Trophy. He has won it 8 times. Essentially every full season he had, he won it. That is more than any other player in the history of the league, even though other players like Larry Robinson, Coffey, and Bourque have played a lot more seasons. But he also was an astonishing passer. He was the first defenseman to lead the league in assists. He still has the record for assists in a season by a defenseman, and he has 4 of the 5 best assist totals ever for a defenseman. Let's look a little at plus minus, because I think that defensemen like Bourque and Coffey and Larry Robinson, I think they're really underrated because of plus minus. Now that may surprise some of you, because I don't like to use plus minus because it's a very noisy statistic, meaning there's a lot of other things that can affect it other than a player's ability. To me in hockey particularly, it is a supplemental statistic. The reason why it's noisy is if your goaltender is great, if Dominik Hasek is your goaltender, that's going to help your plus minus. If your team's defense is great, that's going to help. If your team's offensive, the team that or the line that you're playing with is great, that's going to help. But the thing that's the biggest factor is how often do you play shorthanded situations, and how often, which will obviously hurt your plus minus, because if you're playing shorthanded, that's the time when you're most likely to get a minus. And how often do you play power plays, because you're most likely to get a plus? I think you're following here. Bobby Orr and Wayne Gretzky are the 2 huge exceptions to the rule. They're the only 2 all-time great scorers that essentially were the go-to first-line shift on short-handed situations. So you would think that the amount of short-handed shifts that they skate would hurt their plus minus, and in both cases it did. Wayne Gretzky is not the all-time leader in plus minus, because there were other people, particularly on the Oilers, that could be great in power play situations, but he was by far the best person to put in during shorthanded. Same thing with Bobby Orr. But I'll put up their plus minus. I don't have it in front of me here, but you can see it. Angie will put it up in post. Look at how astonishing Bobby Orr's plus minus is, and it's despite having a much shorter career. Now, those numbers, if you're a casual fan, might just be kind of haze, so let me put it in perspective. In 1970-71, Bobby Orr had not just the greatest defenseman season ever, I mean, that's not even close, but arguably the best single season that any player has ever had, and I would think it's very clear that's true if you take out all of Gretzky's seasons. Let me explain it. First of all, he won the Norris Trophy as the best defenseman, par for the course for him. But also, that was the year he set the record for assists in a single season by a defenseman. He had 102 assists as a defenseman, but his plus minus was 124. Now, what I mean by that is that during the time in which Bobby Orr was on the ice that season for the Boston Bruins, his team scored 124 goals more than their opponents. Whatever noise you have about statistics, that one is astonishing. To give you an idea, Mario Lemieux, who almost every list I've ever seen has second or third all time. Spoiler alert, I do as well. His career plus minus is 114, and Bobby Orr beat that by 10 in 1 season. I would say that is the kind of thing when you see people put Bobby Orr second that is there. But if you are among my family in the Boston area, you can mute this for the next minute or 2. One of the things, John Barber will certainly tell you this when I work for him, I'm always the guy that says the thing that everybody knows is true but nobody wants to say. And in this case, it almost feels sacrilegious for me to say it, but I'm going to say it because I watched all these other videos on lists and listen to podcasts and stuff, and I've never heard somebody mention this, so I feel out of integrity I have to mention this. Bobby Orr was not good at shooting the puck into the net. Just relax. I mean, I know that the casual fan is screaming, he's a defenseman. His job is to take the puck away from the other team and prevent them from scoring, and then maybe skate up and pass it to the centers and the forwards, the people that are wings that can score. That's his job, and he did that job better than anybody in the history of the game. But that would only be a valid thing if Bobby Orr didn't shoot the puck much, but he did. Bobby Orr shot the puck constantly. Every full year he played, he led his team in shots on goal as a defenseman. He led the league. He was the first defenseman to lead the league in shots on goal. He did it twice. I think him and Ray Bourque are still the only defensemen ever to lead the league in shots on goal. There was, I think in 72-73, I'll put his career stats up here. He was injured and missed 15 or 16, 17 games. So taking out that, if you look at his peak between 1969 and 1975, he averaged 385 shots a season. Sorry about that, I moved the table. That's an enormous amount of shots. And here's the problem with it. Over the course of Bobby Orr's career, he only made 8.8% of his shots. That's really bad. I mean, there is nobody that's in the top 20 list of the greatest players of all time that doesn't crush him on that stat. I don't want to talk crap about Bobby Orr. Okay, relatives in Boston, you can turn the phone, unmute it. I'm not saying I love Bobby Orr. Obviously, I love him, but it's just the length of his career and the fact that he had that one weakness. He wasn't good at shooting goals, making goals, makes him number 4. Number 3 is Mario Lemieux. This is going to be an easy one because it's just really simple. Mario Lemieux, I'll put up his career stats here. He is the only person in the history of the National Hockey League that has ever had even a single season that you could take and put on the back of a Wayne Gretzky hockey card and not think to yourself, what happened to Gretzky this year? Was he injured? Was he sick? And here's the thing, Angie, if you could put up on the screen here when you're editing it, the list of like highest, most point total ever in a single season. Of the seasons, he's the only one who ever has a season that fits in with Gretzky's, and he has 4 of those seasons. Are they up with Gretzky's best, seasons? They're not, but just the fact that they won't look ridiculous on his hockey card tells you a lot. There's a lot of things where he's second to Gretzky, and that's pretty friggin' impressive. He's second to Gretzky in points per game. That's the one that people mention the most. The thing to look at this list real closely, I'll put it up on the screen. Start down low and start looking at the teeny increments, because over the course of a career, points per game kind of condenses itself, and they go up very slowly, and there's not much margin between 12 and 11 and 10 and 9, and then you get to number 2, and there's a huge jump for Mario Lemieux, and then Gretzky has a pretty good lead on Mario Lemieux. Gretzky's lead is actually more impressive than it looks because Gretzky's career was longer, and as in any sport, I guess other than LeBron James in basketball, if you play a long career, your career numbers will go up, but your statistics per game will go down, and that definitely happened in Gretzky's case. But either way, he is still second to Gretzky in that, second to Gretzky. And he's the only one whose points go up there. And I guess the really only question about Mario Lemieux is why isn't he second? Because he is second on some lists. And the reason he isn't second is because number 2 is Mr. Hockey. He's also number 2 in terms of the best nicknames any for a hockey player. Let me just say this, because there are lists where Gordie Howe is above Wayne Gretzky. Not many, but there are some. And I want to explain there's 2 groups of people that think that Gordie Howe is the best hockey player of all time. They insist on naming him number 1. The first is macho hockey fans. I don't know how macho I am, but I'm a huge hockey fan. One of the things I like about hockey is their players are just tough. Modern sports fans really hate flopping, and there's a lot of flopping, and there's like a lot of Facebook posts of like, they have two videos side by side, and one is a puck cracking a hockey player right in the face or the head, and then they show a side-by-side meme of like a soccer player going down like a load of bricks, and he literally wasn't even touched. There's similar ones for like basketball and stuff. And hockey players, they should have pride in that. It's one of the best parts about hockey. And there are no soccer players that are as tough as Gordie Howe. And Wayne Gretzky isn't like a tough guy. He only got in one fight that I can remember. And I'll try to find a picture of it. It might be hard. And obviously Gordie Howe is in a lot of fights. Tough people like to think that, that somehow running somebody into the boards and then the puck gets away from them is more effective than, doing what Wayne Gretzky did, which is anticipating where a pass goes and stealing it, or anticipating, or just going one-on-one with a guy and stealing the puck from him and bringing it down the ice. The fact is they have the exact same amount of value, but there's an image. The one thing that's true about every single person is different, and every person only has one thing in common, which is that they buy on emotion and justify with facts. And hockey fans buy on emotion that the best player ever just has to be a bruiser. And, that's fine, but it's indefensible, as we're gonna talk about here. However, I do feel that if you're going to choose if you absolutely have to choose somebody other than Wayne Gretzky, obviously I have him number 2, so I feel like Gordie Howe needs to be that person. When Wayne Gretzky broke the record for most assists in a career, he broke Gordie Howe's. When he broke the record for most goals, he broke Gordie Howe's. When he broke the record for most points, he broke Gordie Howe's. The most important record that Wayne Gretzky broke on Gordie Howe is most MVPs. Like I say, I put a lot in how they were viewed at the time. Gordie Howe is tied with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for the second most MVPs by any player in any sport with 6. Wayne Gretzky has 9, and he beat Gordie Howe for that. But once again, like in any player's bio, when you're second to Gretzky and stuff, that's very impressive. Gretzky has a huge lead, I'm assuming, I don't have it in front of me, in hat tricks in a career. But Gordie Howe, tough hockey fans like to say that he's number 1 in Gordie Howe hat tricks, which is having a goal, an assist, and a fight in the same game. And I'm assuming he's probably got 150 of those. One of the criticisms that, let me say, there are 2 groups of people that say that Gordie Howe is the best, the tough guys and people named Wayne Gretzky. It is worthy of note that if you ask Wayne Gretzky who the greatest hockey player of all time is, he will tell you that it's Gordie Howe. He would have told you that when he was 6 years old. He would tell you that if you ask him once you finish this video. So those are the 2 groups. But there is a group that criticizes both Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky, the kind of people that put modern players up there. And those are the people that say that back when they played, the conditions were easier. They talk about the amount of games played, about the rules. The thing they talk about the most is the equipment that the goalies had was not as effective as the equipment the goalies have today. And that is true. That is definitely true. And if you look at, sabermetricians made an effort, because how impressive if you're a mathematician, if you could take Gretzky's giant dominance in stats and turn it into a statistic that said, hey, this guy actually isn't dominant. So they came up with adjusted scoring. I think it's a little biased because the fact that Wayne Gretzky had such a large lead when scoring on scoring titles, the way the math works, Gretzky is actually making it appear as though his leagues as a whole scores more goals than they do, scores more points than they do, just because he is so outside of the norm. If you say it was a higher scoring league, and it was a higher scoring league by a little bit, but if you cut Gretzky off of the top and look at the scoring leaders, it doesn't look that much higher than today. you know, Connor McDavid's scoring total this year would have been the scoring total leader in a lot of years that Wayne Gretzky played if Wayne Gretzky wasn't playing, okay? So they came up with adjusted scoring to even out the amount of games played in a season and the average goals per game in the league that year. And it does bring Wayne Gretzky closer. I'll put up the stat now. It didn't work. It still shows Gretzky's the greatest player of all time, but it does bring him closer to the rest of the field. It does not do that with Gordie Howe. Gordie Howe is 4th all-time in scoring list, but if you look at adjusted scoring, it moves to 2nd. The goalie equipment might not have been as great when Gordie Howe played, but there were less games played and the total amount of goals scored per game was less. So the saying, oh, he had a big advantage is actually not the case. You know, I'm not saying that the argument for him and Lemieux isn't close. It is close. If you look at peak value, just take their best half dozen seasons or 7 or 8 seasons, Lemieux would be ahead. But Gordie Howe had more great seasons, and so in that case, it's kind of even. Here, to me, is the tiebreaker. Mario Lemieux was not a great defensive player. I think if you ask the most casual fans, they would tell you he's a better defenseman than Wayne Gretzky, but he just wasn't. Just the way he played, he didn't get back on defense as fast as Lemieux. Listen, 2nd best scorer ever. I'm not denigrating Lemieux. Obviously, I have him 3rd on this list, but it winds up being a plus-minus of 114 for him. And, you know, Gordie Howe's is 160, so that's a lead. Maybe you think it's not a gigantic lead, but here's the thing. There was no plus-minus for the first 13 seasons. Once again, you can tell I don't have these stats in front of me. If they're wrong, Angie, as usual, will mention that in the comments. But for his first 13 seasons, he had no plus-minus. You know, would those seasons have helped him? Well, 4 of those seasons, Gordie Howe was voted the most valuable player in the league. So I think his lead over Lemieux is actually much larger. And to have a plus-minus lead on somebody when your career was longer, I think it's kind of hard to say that Lemieux should be ranked ahead of him. Okay, number 1. I know you guys are all in suspense. Should I do a drum roll as to who's number 1? You're right. It's Eric Lindros. No, I'm just kidding. The reason why I'm saying Eric Lindros, who almost nobody watching this knows who he is, Eric Lindros was a guy that they were convinced was going to be better than Wayne Gretzky because he was a big, tough guy and also an incredible scorer. And he was like Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky combined. Anyways, nobody knows who he is anymore, so no, he was not the next great one. I know you know Wayne Gretzky was the greatest hockey player of all time. John Barber doesn't want to feel that, but I know in his heart, in his heart he doesn't feel it, but in his head he does. He has 60 career records. Almost every record in the book he has that's not a goaltending record. Obviously, the big ones are points, assists, and goals. I'd like to point out he has the points, assists, and goals all-time lead in both the regular season and the playoffs. He is one of the few players who was better in the postseason. Actually, this is the only one I have up here, is points per game in the playoffs. His goes down a little bit from his career, but everybody does. So his lead over Lemieux and everybody else is larger than it is in points per game and regular thing. I would like to point out Connor McDavid, who patterns his game after Gretzky, is another one of the rare players who plays better in the postseason. So, you know, he's number 1 in all those things, but this is the one. The point of this video is to make you understand the gap between Wayne Gretzky and the 2nd best player of all time, or everybody else. But this is the argument. The argument for him being the best is pretty simple. He has more goals than anybody else. He's the greatest goal scorer of all time. But he's also the greatest passer of all time, and that's why he has the most points. This is the statistic that you really need to know. Wayne Gretzky, the greatest goal scorer of all time, if he had never scored a single goal in his entire career, he would still be the greatest offensive player in NHL history because he has so many assists. He would still be the all-time points leader even if you take away all of his goals, and he has more goals than anybody who's ever played. So that statistic, nobody can say anything, particularly now that we have adjust points and we know that the difference in goalie equipment and rules, it does not mean that these players would outscore him. So now I want to address what's going on today. I have a friend who, I don't think he believes this, but he did get emotional one day and told me that if Gretzky was playing today, he'd be the 4th best player in the league. So just to give you an idea of how wrong that is and why Gretzky's adjust point total is higher than current players, let's dip into them. And of course, as you're watching this, the number one is Alexander Ovechkin. So I'm gonna talk about him because Alexander Ovechkin in all likelihood will break Gretzky's record for goals. He thinks Ovechkin is better. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, so I know a lot of people who think that, well, he's not a better overall player, but he is a better goal scorer, and that's just not true. It looks like that on the surface because Alexander Ovechkin doesn't pass the puck. So he has so many more shots. Now I want to put on, here's the difference in goals. So let's see, 72, I believe it's close to that. He has a 72 goal lead on Gretzky. I mean, Gretzky has a 72 goal lead on him. But look at it. I don't have it in front of me, but it's approximately 1,300 more shots. He has 72 less goals. We're taking 1,300 more shots, something very close to that. It's obviously not exact. So he takes a lot more shots, but the more that you dive into it, the more you realize that the chasm in their goal scoring ability is actually larger than it seems on the surface. And that is because, I mean, Gretzky was a better defensive player than him. There's the gap in them defensively, statistically, is so huge you just can't even talk about it. And obviously he's a better passer than Ovechkin because Ovechkin doesn't pass. But here's the thing, Alexander Ovechkin's both his goal total and his, more importantly, his plus minus total are inflated because Alexander Ovechkin always plays the power plays and he never plays shorthanded. And Gretzky always played shorthanded. So the one, we talk about Gretzky has 60 career records. One of the ones that actually adds to his legacy that he does not have is power play goals. Why? Because he was doing minutes on every shorthanded shift, particularly with the Edmonton Oilers. He is the greatest goal scorer of all time, but look how far down the list, I'll put it up here, that Gretzky is, and I don't remember it, so you can just read it here. Look how far behind Gretzky is, Ovechkin, but also a bunch of other people that people don't even talk about with Gretzky's skill in terms of power play goals. Alexander Ovechkin way ahead. Now look at shorthanded goals. Want to know the reason why Alexander Ovechkin isn't on this list? Yeah, he has less power play goals as a percentage of his total goals than any player who has ever played hockey at all. We'll put up his regular season stats there. So he has been given the best possible scenario. Let's assume he eventually passes Gretzky. It will be with, 1,500 more shots. Well, no, more than 1,500 more shots than Gretzky. And he will have gotten many goals when it's easiest and almost no goals when it's harder to score. So there is at no point, there is nothing Alexander Ovechkin can do to be considered a better goal scorer than Wayne Gretzky. Let's talk about the other people that this person thinks are better. Sidney Crosby. Sidney Crosby and Ovechkin, there was just always been so many comparisons between the two. And I just don't understand it because there's never been a point when Ovechkin was as good a player as Sidney Crosby. Let's talk about the third one, the one you can maybe make a better argument for, particularly when his career is over, and that's Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid had one of the best post-Gretzky seasons. This year, he is still in the playoffs, so who knows what he might pull down a Stanley Cup. But this season, he led the NHL in scoring by 25 points. I'm not sure that sounds like a big deal to you, but it is. So let me just show you this. I'm going to bring up I made a slide ahead of time that lists the scoring titles for the 3 people that are supposedly better than Gretzky: McDavid, Crosby, and Ovechkin, and all their scoring titles, okay? And I actually have this up in the side. So Connor McDavid, actually, honey, what I didn't do is bring up Gretzky's scoring titles. Can you go to Hockey Reference or whatever, bring up Gretzky's scoring titles, and I'm just gonna ask you for the margin of victory, his point total, and the margin of victory over whoever was second, okay?
Okay.
So Connor McDavid, 5 scoring titles, 25, astonishing this year. You look at his other 4, he averages 13.8. Sidney Crosby has led the league in scoring twice with an average margin of 11.5. Alexander Ovechkin only once. I bet nobody, particularly in the DC area, they'd probably tell you he had 10 scoring titles. 10 scoring titles is how many Gretzky had. Ovechkin led, the 1 year he led by 6. So if you add up McDavid, Crosby, and Ovechkin, they've led the league in scoring a combined 8 times, which is impressive, but that's obviously less than Gretzky at 10. So, honey, obviously I'm not going to have you bring up all 10. So can you just bring up some of Gretzky, start with 81 or whatever, and tell me what the scoring lead is? I'll try to bring them up, but I don't want to bring down the video.
I've got them here. So I'll do 5 or 6 seasons. So,
okay.
And I have something else to say now that I'm looking at this. For the 81-82 season, Gretzky was 65 points ahead of the person in the number 2 slot.
Yeah, 65. So, I'm talking about Connor McDavid. He led by 25. That's astonishing. This is why Gretzky's adjusted point total was true. When you're trashing Gretzky in the time that he played because of the rules or the goalie uniform, keep in mind, every other player played under the same conditions. So you say to yourself, anybody could have scored 200 points. Gretzky's the only player to score over 200 points in a season. He did it a bunch of times. Any player could have done that with what the goalie was wearing. Well, you know who else did do that? Nobody scored 200 points. So, if it was so easy, why didn't other people other than Gretzky did it? And not only did they did it, look at the gap here. Okay, next.
Before we get to the next one, I just want to point out that the difference between Gretzky and number 2 in the 81-82 season was 65 points.
Yeah.
But just as a point of reference, for the difference between the number 2 and 3 slot, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and so on, there's nothing greater really than 10. It's not unusual for the gap to be 5 points, 3 points, maybe 9 or 10 points. And
so as you're taking this, you'll edit that in, so that's what they're looking at right now?
Yeah. It's not even close. He was 65 points between 1 and 2.
Okay, let's go.
It's not even close. But the next
some other seasons.
Sure, 82-83. Gretzky was 72 points ahead of the person in second place. Again, this difference between second and third and on down, same thing, very little difference. But for him, 72 points. 83-84. Paul Coffey was the person in the second position, and Gretzky was 79 points higher than Paul Coffey in 83-84.
Probably he was second because Gretzky was passing to him, which really helps your score total.
And going on to the 84-85 season, Gretzky was 73 points ahead of the person in number 2.
In 84-85, that was the year, there's so many Hall of Famers in that year, and I don't know the order, but it's Yari Curry, Marcel Dion, Paul Coffey probably was up there.
Yeah, Paul Coffey's number 5 that season.
Yeah, there's just he's going against great players, right?
Right. Okay, moving on to 85-86, the difference between Gretzky and the person in number 2, who happened to be Mario Lemieux, was 74 points.
74 points over Mario Lemieux.
86-87, the difference was 75 points.
Wow.
And again, the difference between the other positions, very small. He blew away the person in number 2 every time.
So this is what I would say is, I know that Gretzky's the best, but here's the better argument. And it's an argument that I would make. I believe that Wayne Gretzky, the difference between Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player of all time, and the second best greatest hockey player of all time, whoever you feel that is larger than the difference between the GOAT in any other sport. The difference between Tom Brady and the second best player, the difference between Michael Jordan and LeBron James, the difference between Babe Ruth and whoever you think is the second. Babe Ruth, there's an argument there. But those are Babe Ruth and Wayne Gretzky are the only 2 players that you could talk about that. Maybe, there was a time when Pele was his dominance was very similar, but now that you have Messi and players like that, in terms of all time, the gap isn't as large. So I would say that that's really his legacy. He is the most dominant team player in the history of sports. Thank you so much for watching The Four Chains. Next week, I don't know what list that is, but it's going to be whatever whatever you guys say in the comments. Please let me know what you want to see. This is your channel. The Four Chains is your channel because you're the Chain Gang, and you give us the list and we will put them on video.